The Proleptic Journal of a Shite-Extractor Tractor Man by Scott Waller. 7. One day later. Well, reader, no strange journeys through the bowels of the docking station today. More's the pity. Today was a rather ordinary day. I spent most of it in my strapping pod. I did have a little time in the afternoon to seek out information on the slipnet about unaccounted for wandering women in the inner workings areas, but I didn't get anywhere. Nor did I expect to, because I'd never even heard of anything remotely similar to this before. My work routine was almost broken by a call out to a private establishment, but I wasn't needed in the end. There was another EE tractor man available nearer the source of the problem. Shame. I haven't been out in a while. I spent some time beefing up my AdFlush account. I also managed to squeeze in a couple of games. It's funny how your tastes change. I used to be into virtual sex and violence games. I was at it all the time, but as the years have gone by, my appetite for that sort of thing has waned. As for my real sexual needs, they are mostly taken care of at home by Dolly. Yet despite some of the mental improvements I made on her of late, she needs mechanical repairs to recover the slickness of her movements. The truth is that my poor Dolly is becoming a bit run down and outdated. She's limited both in her performance and her stimulus additive range compared to dolls that you can hire. She's also clumsy, though her fellatio is still top notch. She doesn't capture my imagination, like mysterious women in Eurodramas, or like the blonde I saw in the basement yesterday. I think I can safely say that if yesterday it turned out to be a model like Dolly giggling in the corridor, it would have been a letdown. Dear me, I must stop going on about it. It was a weird experience, but it's unlikely to happen again. As for Dolly, if she's not in mint condition, I'm still very attached to her. Although sometimes I feel that things have gone a bit humdrum between us. I tell her to get up in uniform and sex punish me. She spanks me, but that doesn't do much for me anymore. These days, when I get her to put on passé nursing clothes, I no longer want to lift up her skirt and shag her when she's bending over to fetch something. I just want her to tuck me in, especially when I've a cold. It's all a bit contrived, really. When she starts spouting out her moral spiel, I still sometimes feel the urge to go into violent rape mode, savouring the ambivalence of her shouldn't want it but it's too good squeals, as the instruction manual puts it. But I barely have the energy to go through with my design. It just feels silly. And those are about the best options I can get out of the old dear. Everything else either doesn't interest me, or is a minor variation on the same broad themes. One day I'll take her to the franchise dealer to have her functionalities thoroughly updated, so I can do manoeuvres on her like I used to do. But I haven't decided which other mental features I want to improve on the dodgy ones that my second-hand local sex doll dealer added. There's so much to choose from, although much of it is expensive. I remember fondly many a weekend spent tangled up in her Kama Sutra poses. She has some scenes stocked in her memory that she recorded on the camera she has behind her eyes, in her feet, and on the periscope swivel cameras in her ears, and between her holes in her crack. Thanks to her home film director function, we can watch automatically edited versions of our old selves at it on a wall screen and reminisce nostalgically on the days when we were both in better shape. You have to count your blessings. We are lucky. We can do whatever we want to our sex dolls, and make them do whatever we want to us. There is none of the fuss that you get when you go about that awkward intimacy thing with real human beings. While in your day you had to bring your fantasies, foibles, and stimulation-attaining demands to a living partner, and negotiate your respective expectations, deal with hopes, disappointment, resentment, blame, self-inadequacy, guilt, etc., we can do what the hell we like. There are no hang-ups to be had about sexual fantasies. With a doll you can rape, be raped, torture, cut skin, make it scream or beg for more pain, and even program it to have a masochistic orgasm just at the point when you get tired of mistreating the thing. Like most people, I've been there and done that kind of thing. To be honest, the thrill tapers off after a while. But everyone is different in that regard, and there's a wide variety on offer to meet different tastes. You can get all sorts of Meccano dolls. Anything goes from reptile alien babes to hunky minotaurs. Hermaphrodite sex dolls are all the rage at the moment. You can preset the program to change from man to woman and back again during your romp, simply by calling out a transgender command. But that's not my cup of tea. If ever I feel like it, my sex bitch has among her functionalities the capacity to whip on a strap-on. I still go through some sadomasochistic phases every now and then, but it's just a question of spicing things up. I'm just happy that Dolly's programmed orgasm simulation synchronization with mine is still in good working order. I doubt very much that such coincidences work so well in real life. I, for one, don't look back with nostalgia at the supposedly real thing. With the little experience I have, I am pretty sure that it can't be beaten by a top-of-the-range Jap doll. The Japanese are traditional market leaders in the sector, though some swear by their Eastern European Meccano babes. I have hired the service of these little blondies, and can certainly see the attraction, but it's not my preference as a keep-at-home item. As a matter of fact, I've never been particularly attracted to blondes. That's one of the things that surprises me about how enchanted I was by the blonde in the corridor yesterday. As for ethics, there's only one rule with dolls. You can do whatever tickles your fancy, so long as you can pay for it. Because it's all private fantasy, a libidinal human being's bedroom is his or her castle. Some people go in for child sex dolls. That was never my taste, but I don't judge others who do that kind of thing. Just as long as it's only a sex droid, it's perfectly acceptable in our day. In fact, I had a mate at work called Carl, who said he got hold of a knockoff child doll, which he gets out the cupboard every now and then. We don't worry about real paedophile predators anymore. Children are well protected and looked after. They don't get to move a muscle without some camera following their whereabouts. Since the generalization of biometrics and subcutanal microchips, kids are safe. From birth, all babies have at least one chip inserted under their skin. These microchips, which are soft and contain only microscopic metal filaments, enable parental authorities and security services to detect the location of children and find out who they are with in a jiffy. In this way, they don't go wandering off too far or get kidnapped. If anyone tries to take out the chip without authorization, it sends out an emergency message, and law enforcement is there in no time. Occasionally, some father goes funny in the head and carries out some tragedy. Such incidents are unusual enough to get a big news gossip stream audience on the slipnet. We have a saying, violence begins and ends in the home. That means that in our day, almost all serious violence is domestic. Most violence was domestic in your day too, but you were far more worried about the rarer incidents of violence that took place outside the home. It's probably because of that bias that great efforts were made to stamp out non-domestic violence. I believe that the disparity between intense attention to violence outside the home and indifference to domestic violence was brought up by those who argued for greater overseeing and institutionalization of parenting. Of course, they won the day. Our compulsory parent authority regulations have long ceased to be controversial. All parents appreciate having the pressure of bringing up children lightened by child-rearing institutions. Even the minority who decide to do parenting the old way are happy to have a break when they give up their kids for a few months during the mandatory out-family rearing periods. Like many lower strata, I don't have kids. As I mentioned, I couldn't be the seed provider anyway. But even so, it's so much hassle. You have to find a partner also willing to commit to all that rigmarole. You have to have the means. You have to go through all the parenting tests, which are arduous and time-consuming, and I'm not sure that I will be declared apt. For me, finding a real partner would be the toughest hurdle. That's why I've always stuck to dolls for my sex needs. The idea of me actually hooking up with a beautiful lady, like the one I glimpsed yesterday, is a silly pipe dream. A nice one, but I would barely know what to do with her. Nowadays, a lot of my old interest in sex has withered away. I prefer to spend my money on virtual holidays, or playing a Euro game of the Virtual Tycoon or Virtual Killer variety. If I can be bothered, I indulge in a bit of virtual travel learn, which is very informative, but a bit of a strain on my poor little head. Not that my job requires much conscious expense of mental energy. The machine puts to work the brain faculties it needs. Sometimes, as I have mentioned, you can Eurogame while you're working, though I would be lying if I were to say that we can play the best games available, because they limit the choice. Still, even within those limitations, that counts as progress compared to what you lot had to put up with. In your day, you had to do your leisure things outside work, while sacrificing the best part of yourself for work. So much so that you often allowed these pointless tasks, which vaguely stimulated cerebral activity, to fool you into thinking that you were fulfilled by your work. Well, I suppose you have to do something in this life. We are creatures of purpose. If someone tells you that what you do is very important, then you may as well believe it. As for those who were not fulfilled in their work, they just had to put up with it and take solace in thoughts about the weekend or that particular workday's end. Having said that, I do know that some people with clerical jobs were able to spend a fair bit of time fiddling about on your primitive slipnet, the internet, doing shopping, following celebrity news and playing games and the like. They were the lucky ones. In fact, modern post-hedonal revolution researchers who designed workplace schemes developed new systems, many of which are still in use today, from their observations of that kind of semi-clandestine activity. I suppose you lot were too busy getting by to see your world clearly. I should say that you were busy getting ahead, because you were obsessed about being better than the Joneses. I don't have to worry about that. I'm lower stratum, as good as any other lower stratum, and staying that way. Some of your competitive mentality still exists in the middle stratum, where they struggle to get the best job possible. Their biggest fear is dropping down a stratum, although that's rare once they've got into their job. Their kids drop stratum quite a lot. Parents are mostly fine about it these days. They trust that their child will be happy in their assigned stratum, because they are better adapted to it. Not that they don't try to give their kids the best chance of being in the middle stratum, because they do. You can see why. They want to share the same mental universe as their children. But their stratum-demoted kids lead a better life with us than they would if they were stuck up there and not able to cope. I once knew a lower stratum son of a middle stratum whose parents made clear their disappointment to him. He fell out with them for a time, but eventually they ended up reconciled to society's stratum allocation. Everyone just got on with their lives. That's the difference between your society and ours. We accept our lot rather than strive for something else all the time. In your day, you thought that earning lots of money was what made you. We don't believe that anymore. I suppose the money you earned was the basis of your security, while we have security. It's surprising all the same just how invested you were in an artificial medium of exchange, a convenient social fiction. To think that all your projects, homes, cars, families, better homes, better cars, better families, were built on a sea of neurotic fiduciary tokens. You were floating on a sandy mountain of debt that you thought was prosperity, and that falsified your vision of the world. You didn't know that you were reaching the slow tail-off point of the apparently endless accumulation of profit. You didn't realize that productivity gains were finite. Your currency systems and colossal swishing about of money chasing after money could not go on forever. But people didn't grasp that until it was too late, and the whole global system needed seriously reorganizing in order to prevent total anarchy. They tried all sorts of things to fix it, reform it, and change it before things finally stabilized. While society was beginning to stabilize, the global hedonal revolution enabled everyone to focus on the essential, the attainment of individual happiness. Companies go to great lengths to ensure that we are happy at work. Work techniques have evolved so much that you would hardly recognize a thing in today's world. It all started off with a technological leap that we call the Great Skills Shift. This involved a transfer of complex human skills from the human operator of machines to the machines themselves. In fact, the machines often decide which neurological functions they enlist for a given task. You might wonder whether our thoughts guide the programs or the programs guide our thoughts. Humans often give machines instructions, but human beings' choices are informed by machines. In short, no one is entirely sure whether we run the machines or the machines run us. It's probably a bit of both. Today, to work, all you need is a working brain and a functioning digestive tract. You plug your brain and body into a workstation, and Bob's your proverbial uncle. If you're manually orientated, a large soma machine accesses your bodily energy and links up to your basic brain functions when needed. If you're a clever middle stratum, it's your cerebral capacity that's mostly put to use. It goes without saying that all strap-in pods at work empty your PWE for you and direct the content towards an EE distribution center like ours. While for us, it's so easy to contribute that unemployment is impossible. In your day, if you didn't work, you might fall into despair or destitution. You could slip down the slide of downward social mobility to misery at the drop of a hat. I imagine that was a prospect which scared people intensely. On the other hand, the dearth of possibility for upward social mobility did not stop people fantasizing about it happening to them. Indeed, the less likely the reality, the more intense the fantasy. This was partly reinforced by a belief in the meritocracy that outlived the realities in which the rich got better off, while the condition of most of the rest deteriorated or stagnated. As I glean from neuromentries, ordinary folk took refuge in the dream of becoming rich to escape their misery. And yet, if rare individuals did somehow suddenly come into wealth, they often didn't know how to handle it. Nowadays, idle thoughts about being rich are not our daily fantasy bread. Those who belong to that tiny minority at the top in the upper stratum, the Davosians, are rumoured to spend a lot of time worrying about power. In that respect, they are a vestige of your age. But to be honest, I don't really know what Davosians do. As long as they are running things efficiently for the general happiness of society, I don't really care either. We tend to feel sorry for the grasping psychological types you sometimes hear about. They are considered mentally unsound, and various remedies and treatment sessions are available to help them out. There are virtual rich games, which you can play to have the sensation of feeling rich, so as to help you get it out of your system. Through these means, silly dreams about living a life that is inaccessible to people, not born to upper stratum, get chewed on, savoured, and duly spat out. Although I dare say that the real rich would claim that a neurogame is not like the real thing. That old authenticity chestnut again. I've had my phases on such neurogames. They can be quite fun. In that genre, there are spending games, power trip games, or adulated star games, depending on your personality. So strong is the feeling of being powerful, rich, or adulated during the excitement of these games that you would hardly need the real thing. What's more, you usually come a cropper by getting too involved in it, as you would in real life, so you leave the game realizing how lucky you are. I had fun with a Eurogame called Fourth Reich, which is a fantastic power trip experience, but you always end up getting beaten in the end and have to go through the traumatizing experience of choosing your sordid suicide to end the game. I should say at this point that when you start one of these Neurogames, you commit yourself to being strapped in and playing it till it's over. You can't just switch it off at will, otherwise it wouldn't feel real, and the game's synapse activation function makes sure that you feel real emotions. On the other hand, the strap-in guardians make sure that you're not too traumatized by the virtual scenario of the game. In my teen years, I flirted with those old-fashioned, pretend-to-be-famous type games. But they were not for me. It's a little vapid, to be honest. Such games recall an age of Hollywood stars, who were essentially name-face commodities that helped publicize and sell films, if their popularity ratings happened to be high. An age of glossy magazines covered with non-entities famous for being in silly TV programs, famous for being famous, or famous for being royal. An age of, "Hey guys," moronic vloggers parading their trivial lives and a stream of uninformed nonsense besides. I can't help both laughing at that era and feeling sorry for it. I suppose that in the old days, you needed to admire a bunch of twits to have some sort of fantasy material to build up your idle dreams of having what you couldn't have, and being what you couldn't be, in order to while away the idle moments. We don't need to dream about being wealthy. Under very specific circumstances, we can actually be wealthy, if we are willing to pay for it. Pay for being rich? Impossible, you protest. Paradoxical it is, I grant you, but impossible it is not. You don't pay for it with your money, you pay for it in the currency of time. Under the agreed terms of a pez, as I've already explained, you earn present goods by giving up your future years. Society benefits from this sacrifice because you're not draining away its resources. Obviously, when you're young, everybody gives more energy than they receive, while the opposite is true after a certain age. But the books have to balance somehow. You can't have too many old biddies hogging energy in order to prolong an unproductive old age, wheezing away on a life support system beyond their second century, can you? In any case, who would want to drag it out that long? How does that relate to paying to be rich, you wonder? Well, it's simple. Some people agree to accept a big upfront payment in exchange for being euthanized only a few years after retirement. This is known as a blazing blowout pez option. It's rare that people opt for the blazing blowout, but some do, if they're obsessed with fulfilling one particular ambition, for example. I've seen it on Eurobulletins. I sometimes wonder if you might be shocked by some of the things that go on in our world. Pezes must sound odd to you if you don't get the context. Ditto for stratum hierarchy. We are used to our condition, and when you're used to something, you don't whinge about it. There are advantages to being in the lowest stratum. It's an easy life. We don't get the wealth, the perks, and the prestige available to middle strata, but we do get a hassle-free existence. That's important for us. That's why we don't really go in for what you called love, that stultifying infatuation with another human being. Most of us want no more than what is available. We don't have the excitement of vaulting up the social ladder. But people don't die in the streets or degenerate into winos or forlorn drug addicts, except in some no-go areas of the radio plazas. We have all sorts of compulsory regeneration programs for those who fall by the wayside. Only occasionally do you find someone who can't be fixed up by our improvement programs. They are confined for a while and then allowed to go free. If they cannot look after themselves, they are either encouraged to move to a rediplaz or offered a blowout pez that is too attractive to turn down. But such cases are exceptional. Something is really wrong with people like that. One day later. I don't recall if I mentioned it, but yesterday I was haunted the whole day by the memory of that roaming blonde of the basement corridors. Persistent images of her have flashed up in my mind ever since I left her. I wanted to tell somebody. That's what a sex doll is for, but I thought it best not to tell Dolly. I didn't mention it to the conversation app on my home system either, nor did I tell anyone on the Slipnet about it. Yet I needed to share it with someone, so eventually I decided to spill the beans to Dennis. He was very approachable, but he is management and, like anyone in his position, he could do damage to me with his data input if he chose to. Still, I did reason that he was unlikely to tell anyone about the girl, since I might mention this journal if he did. He's clever enough to have covered his back thoroughly, so I don't have the ability to get him into trouble. It will be my word against his. His word would carry weight, while my word, along with its speaker, would be whisked off for a spell in a psychological treatment facility. But if he had slipped up elsewhere in his shady chrono-dealings, then even my unsubstantiated allegations might set alarm bells ringing. Eventually I stopped worrying altogether and threw caution to the wind. Seeing that he was available on a private Neuroline, I belled him. He said that he would have time for a chat later on in the day, and that he would bell me from his personal HCC, hologram communication chamber. Sure enough, he called me and we had a chat. When I told him about the girl in the corridor, he seemed more amused than surprised. "A real girl?" he asked. "Are you sure it wasn't a sex droid?" "I'm sure," I insisted. "She moved in a natural, graceful way that could only come from a human being. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. They make excellent sex droids programmed to dance like professional ballerinas." "That's just it. They're programmed. She wasn't trotting out some perfectly choreographed routine. She moved simply but enchantingly. But you weren't close up, so you couldn't get a proper look. I could see straight away. There are bodily movements that are imperfect, and you shouldn't try to perfect them. I don't know. I just felt it." "Well, well, I wish I had time to go and find out for myself." "If you don't, maybe I should. Go hunting through that labyrinthine underground tunnel network. It's a needle in a haystack job. Who's to say she'd be there?" "I could try." "Are you often assigned down there?" "No, now that you ask. In fact, I was hoping that well, since you and I, dispatched thingamy and all that." "Are you trying to say that I am indebted to you?" No, not at all. I'm sorry. This business has put me in a state." I went on, probably sounding a bit desperate by now. "It's eating me up. I can't stop thinking about her." "Don't tell me you've gone to fairyland and fallen in love." Ha ha. "No, not at all. It's just lodged in my head somewhere, and I don't think it'll go away if I don't try and see her again." He paused, running his thumb along his mauve beard stripe, while looking my hologram reproduction up and down. "I'll see if we can fix you up with a little assignment down there. I'm not promising anything, but I suppose I can do something to help out a loyal worker in his time of need. Maybe I can open up some doors for you. We'll see." And with that very vague assurance, which in my excitement I took for an oath, my heart was lifted. It has been on a roller coaster ride ever since. Until I find out whether I get that assignment, I'll continue explaining a few things about our world. I wanted to talk about our political system. Many of your science fiction films showed the future as some sort of replica of a 20th century totalitarian system. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, democracy has progressed, some rediplazes accepted, in tandem with the advances in technology. Our democratic system is far more sophisticated than yours. You had to vote for the administrative team that would govern you for a stretch of time until you got fed up with it disappointing the hopes you rather foolishly held out for it when you voted it in. Once their term came to a close, you could then choose another one. You usually got fed up with them, and it was back to the old team again. Of course, everyone got cynical. Politics became corrupted by business, and good people turned their noses up at it. Only greedy careerists, power cravers, and the pathologically vain ended up in high office under those conditions. In your day, aging populations, embittered about the loss of their youth, helped turn electioneering into a cattle market in which the people bid for the demagogue who could best propose the illusion of the restoration of some good old age in which voters were young and sprightly, especially since being young was lionized, while old people were scorned. This mixing up of people power, personal gripes, and a forlorn quest for lost youth skewed everything. I think historians call it the geronto-democratic tragedy. For us, most of what you call politics has become automated, and positions of power are allotted through a combination of various programmed or collegial mechanisms among the upper strata. We don't need to worry about pointless demagogical political exercises designed to reassure the public. We live in a neurosensitive democracy. Rather than changing the whole team of administrators at regular intervals, we remove individual ministers, one by one, according to their performance in the emotion reaction raters, that read societal mood with scientific precision, from all the data gathered from the millions of people who are daily plugged into the slipnet. If the president decides to remove a minister, He or she is simply validating sophisticated parameters that are worked out in the central state data system. Pretty much everybody is strapped in, both at home and at work at some point or other, so the will of everybody is taken into account. Special detectors assess the level of satisfaction in whatever sphere is covered by the jurisdiction of a given minister. If the sum total of people's reaction is negative over a given time period on the subject of, say, antisocial behaviour, we'll get a new Minister of Justice. As far as the details go, I'm not entirely sure what goes on, if I'm honest. Ordinary people like me don't take an interest in following who has what position. The fiction that electoral processes could be an effective counterbalance to the rule of the few went out the windows decades ago. But individual incompetent performers from among that few are weeded out before people notice and get angry about it. Your voted representatives were the ancestors of our eligibles. Eligibles are official persons from the upper stratum who are eligible to become part of the ruling administration and who end up becoming part of the ruling administration. To achieve office as an eligible, candidates propose a range of measures that have been recommended by demos technicians. The measures differ from one candidate to another, mainly in technicalities. Most candidates win office on account of their record and whether his or her personality obtains the right mixture of sympathy or seriousness. Once the eligibles have been selected, they implement their measures, which involve something like the minor tinkering with the hedono policy system which coordinates happiness correctors. But all that is a little dull. I don't have the time, the capacity or the will to bother with it. Middle strata seem to go in for this kind of thing with far more enthusiasm than us. I do participate in CCEs, compulsory citizen exercises, where we can have a say about issues around twice a year. The nearest equivalent to this in your day was the primitive tool of the referendum. In your referenda, you could only say yes or no or nothing. Oddly enough, even when the question was quite clear and simple, people would often vote in the same way for totally different reasons and entertain completely different expectations. With our CCE, we can express a much more nuanced range of opinions. There are two types of compulsory citizen exercises. The first is an upstream CCE. In this consultation, the strapped-in neurositter, asterisk, has to listen to a series of official questions. The reactions to these questions are absorbed into a highly sophisticated, gigantic computer called the CCE analyzer. The CCE analyzer converts the information into quantifiable data. It then comes up with a series of prioritized proposals. These proposals are examined by the eligibles, who feed back to us their interpretation of the analyzer's data in the downstream CCE. We can answer this downstream CCE by pressing a range of voting buttons. It's a little boring, so I often do it while playing a light neuro game. Strictly speaking, that's not allowed, but people do it anyway. Our strap-in seats are able to measure the force with which buttons are pressed, but you won't know about individualized button sensitivity technology, because it wasn't invented in your era. Thanks to this technology, the Guardian's emotion detectors can read not just whether a button has been pressed or not, but how it has been pressed. They match these readings up to the neuro readings of the presser and his or her data history. Emotion detectors can tell if the button has been pressed with force because of anger, frustration, or what have you. If levels among a large population require it, steps are taken to treat the particular social profile of the anger involved by powerful administration program machines and demos technicians. The best solutions to the problem are enacted, and things go back to normal. For the most part, program machines are able to regulate problems with minimal intervention, although it's more complicated in the radioplazes. In fact, mechanized social management takes care of most things for us now. Exceptionally, a build-up can occur too slowly to detect the problem. When that happens, a few people might do the most uncivilized things, like demonstrate in the streets, or even refuse to fulfill the foundational social pact, by which I mean they refuse temporarily to work. Fortunately, these relics from another age are few and far between. The same can be said for rare protest actions carried out by a tiny number of people who hover at the verge of deportation to the Ray Diplazes. This is their last gasp after the horse has pretty much already bolted. I have never met such people personally, but I have been neuro-informed about them. I once heard that one of them was living in my present Merc, mobile urban residential conglomeration, although that might be a false rumour. There isn't much that can be done for these social types. There's no helping those that can't help themselves. If the worst does come to the worst, they are deported to a Ray Diplaz. As a matter of fact, I recall that when I was young, I had the exciting experience of knowing someone who was classified as a potential deportee to a Ray Diplaz. Luckily for him, he went through an intensive head and eye readjustment program and came out fully revised. I didn't speak to him much, so I couldn't get out of him what it was like to be in that situation. I remember him looking subdued when he was going through the program, but he came out of the treatment at the right end. By the way, he wouldn't have found it unusual or anything that my communication with him was so limited, since in our day humans don't communicate as often or as easily to each other face to face. Things have advanced so much that we have our own sophisticated minties, mechanized intelligent entities, to communicate with. Dolly has a Minty installed in her. I have a Minty in my home system too, and can access others on the SlipNet. I also have SlipNet buddy contacts, who are pre-selected by compatibility buffer programs. It must have been awful in your day when you were forced to make friends with people just because you lived near each other, or worked together, or belonged to the same family. I suppose you had to choose speak chums from people you rubbed shoulders with at different stages of your life. You must have had a hard time finding compatibles, though, especially for sex partners. Give me a mechanized sex bitch any day of the week. None of that romantic rubbish about finding Mrs. Right. We can design our speak chums and fuckmates according to our needs, wants and whims. What more can you want than what you want? On that note, I think I'll call it a day.